Probably number one is I find a lot of cyclists, obviously most people train first thing in the morning. There's, some people can't train first up in the morning, but for most cyclists, they're morning trainers. When they're trying to lose weight, you generally wake up pretty motivated, you're not overly hungry first thing in the morning, and I find cyclists use that to their advantage and usually go fasted.
It's easier to skip breakfast.
Easier to skip breakfast, easier not to fuel on the bike. I'm going to use this session for fat loss, I'm going to use this session for weight loss, so I'm just going to go out and see how far I can get through the day without eating.
And just quickly, why is it when you come back from a session as well, you're not that hungry? That's what I've always found interesting.
Yeah, so and as you're exercising, body temperature is increasing. So I find this particularly with runners, cyclists, triathletes, core body temperature increases as we exercise. That actually switches off hunger hormones as well.
I see.
Versus some swimmers, if we're in cool or cold water, it actually decreases core body temperature, which increases appetite hormone as well. So you'll find swimmers tend to get very hungry after sessions versus cyclist runners
That's
tend
interesting.
to
I have been hungrier after swimming. There you go.
Absolutely.
I've learned something today.
So when you don't have that appetite and you're trying to lose weight, people see that as a big win. They're like, great, I'm not hungry, I can skip this meal, I'm going to get through to lunch before I eat my first meal or whatever it might be. Now, the downside to that is we can't deny the fact that you've you've used up all this energy, right? So it's kind of thinking of like a pendulum. This pendulum is swung and you're in this huge deficit. At some point, we have to make up for that a little bit. Our appetite comes back later in the day. We've used up all this energy. And so what generally happens is instead of going and eating something that's really wholesome and long-lasting energy, so we tend to get that all of a sudden, oh my gosh, I'm starving, and then overconsume, portion size increases, potentially choosing things that are high energy, so high sugar, quick fixes to get the energy levels back up. It's just natural sort of animal instinct to grab food that's going to give me energy quickly.
Beast mode, I call it.
Beast mode, yeah. So it's kind of like going grocery shopping when you're hungry. There's not a lot of rational thought to it. It's just like get energy in as quick as possible. Takes a little bit longer to feel full, so we tend to eat more portion size. And so what happens is as the day goes on, that deficit gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and particularly when we start getting fatigued in the day because we haven't eaten a whole lot at the front end of the day, throw in some stress of that as well, that self-control sort of starts to dwindle a little bit as the day goes on. So food choices change. And if we compound that over the week, you might start really well Monday, but by the end of the day or the end of the week, that deficit is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And so what we find is that people, that weight loss kind of levels out. So it might be a really large deficit front end of the week. We add the back end of the week and the weekend, potentially some social occasions, stopping, halfway through our long ride and we're hitting the bakery. That deficit gets smaller. And so potentially we're even in surplus, that weight loss just evens out. And so people are constantly in this almost dieting pattern of restrict but then overeat. And so they feel like they're putting in all this effort to cut back on food, but their actual calorie consumption is just as high as it was previously. So they're getting very minimal result for the amount of effort that they're putting in. What I try to get a lot of cyclists to do is a slow burn. So front load food around training, eat portion controlled meals over the day. And so it might feel like I'm fueling and eating too much when I'm trying to lose weight. But what we're doing is we're supporting the performance on the bike, but we're also supporting your appetite over the day as well. And so this is where sometimes we're going to fuel for sessions that may not feel like you need it, but it is going to set you up for better sort of appetite control and better recovery over the day as well and over the week. And then so even sort of post-exercise as well, we know that uptake of carbohydrates is much more efficient in the body as well. So we're using that energy for a purpose. It's replenishing glycogen stores in the muscles, so it's supporting lean mass and maintaining lean masses, and then we can target more specifically fat mass as opposed to just being in this huge deficit and potentially compromising lean mass stores as well. So it's really important that people are trying to focus on maintaining their lean mass whilst they're reducing body fat, because it'll keep their metabolism higher. If we just focus on weight loss and we're getting rid of muscle as well as body fat, we actually have to keep eating less and less and less because our metabolism's lower. Where if we keep that muscle mass high, it'll actually keep your metabolism higher, meaning you can eat more while still getting the body fat result.
Interesting. All right, number 2.
Yes.
Second mistake cyclists make with their nutrition.
Being fearful of carbohydrates is a huge one. And I think if you were to Google weight loss diets,
Atkins.
one of the first things that comes up is low carb. And that's not to say that it doesn't work for some people, but when we're looking at the bigger picture of 1, enjoyment, sustainability, 2, performance on the bike, and 3, maintaining lean mass, including carbohydrates, but specific to different times over the day and the types of carbohydrates is really important. So, using those simple carbohydrates around training that are absorbed quickly into bloodstream and absorbed quickly into the muscles for energy versus only using complex carbohydrates away from training. So it's longer lasting energy. We get the health benefits and the vitamins and minerals. That supports gut health as well. But again, it's all in portion controlled and then sort of looking bigger picture. So it's not about completely cutting out carbohydrates. It's not about carb loading. It's being quite specific where we put those carbohydrates in. So carbohydrates for me represents energy. Where you're using energy, we give you carbohydrates. Where you're not using energy, we can limit them.
Okay. And do you tend to limit them with your programs as a general blanket when they're away from hard training sessions?
When they're away from hard training. And I generally sort of use that for all athletes, not just cyclists.
Okay.
Makes sense that where we're not using energy, so if we're about to go to sleep, for example, we're not going to have a huge carbohydrate meal. We still might include them, but the portion is going to be very specific to that person, what they do for a living, who else is at the table with them, what session have we got coming up the next morning, just how much energy in total they're using. So looking at the week, we want to match carbohydrate and total energy intake with the day.
Yes. If they do have a big session the next morning, though, you would put a fair bit of carbohydrate on the plate that evening? Yep.
If they can't wake up and eat a significant amount of food before a long or a really hard session the next morning, we would use the night before as a way of fueling for that session in the morning.
Okay. And the third, which was quite a learning for me when I worked with you, which was about taking protein and being a bit more respectful with where you place it across the day.
Yep. Your total protein intake is more important than timing, but I would still argue that timing of protein is really important for the bigger picture.
Okay.
So what we want to try and do is once you know your protein target based on your sport, based on your body weight, once we have that number, the best and most effective way to do that is spread that out over the day. So the number one goal is just get that total protein target.
So if I'm 80 kilos, roughly how much protein should I have as a cyclist?
As a cyclist, I'm probably somewhere between that 1.4 to 1.8 grams of protein per kilogram body weight per day.
Okay.
Yep.
And not done all in one hit directly after the ride.
All in one hit. And this is where spreading it out of the day is really important. So like what we would have done with yourself, Cam, is spreading that out. Not only will it help sort of the drip feed of amino acids into the muscles, and so we're getting recovery for a longer period of time, but also it helps fill you up. So it is quite filling. So what I normally see is people are pressed for time in the mornings, and our usual kind of go-to breakfast items are toast, cereals, even eggs on toast. We're getting a pretty small amount of protein from that sort of breakfast.
Yep.
So people are often hungrier quicker. And I'll often hear a lot of people say, I'm starving after eating cereal for breakfast. Within an hour I want to eat again. So cereal must be bad. And it's more so that we don't have enough protein in that meal to fill us up for very long. So for me, having protein as a backbone over the day is really important, not only from a recovery perspective, but just, to make yourself feel full and so that you're not constantly consuming carbohydrates as a way to fill up.
Yes.
And that also, includes, we need to include vegetables in there as well. And that's a way to fill ourselves up aside from all the health benefits, obviously, of including fruits and vegetables over the day.
Yep. With splitting protein up over the course of the day, I feel like there's maybe a misconception, particularly because there's protein bars and people go, I need to take something on my ride, I'll get a protein bar, and they're eating protein during their training session or even before their training session. So with the protein split over the day, should they be having it before a training session and during a training session as well as after and during the day?
Not typically. I would only sort of include protein before or during a session if it was going to be really, really long sessions, so like 6 hours plus.
Okay.
And that's because it's difficult to get in your total protein requirement, on the leftover hours that you're awake for that day. For any of those other sessions, we're not necessarily getting any benefits from having protein before or during. And in fact, is what it's doing, it's actually slowing down the absorption of the carbohydrates. So it's slowing, how quickly we can access that, carbohydrate or fuel stores.
Okay.
Yep. So kind of immediately post if we can. That doesn't have to be in a supplement form, ideally from food first, because we can get other nutrients that are going to come from dairy products. It could be eggs, it could be a meat source. If you're vegetarian, it could be tofu or legumes and lentils. We're going to get other sort of nutrients that come from that, more likely filling than a protein shake or a protein bar. However, if it's easier to consume something like that initially and then use food thereafter, then that's always an option as well.
Yep. And with protein, do you need to have your big whack after a hard session? A lot of people, obviously we've grown up with protein shakes and, putting protein after your hard session. So is it important to put a lot of front load your protein directly after your hard sessions?
Not necessarily. I think it's figuring out what works well for you. We need to have, around about that 20 to 30 gram hit from a recovery perspective. Okay. But again, it's more so to fill you up, because post-session, like you said, often we're not overly hungry. When that appetite does kick in, it usually comes hard and fast. So we're trying to limit how quickly that sort of hunger comes, and we can slow that down and control the appetite over the day. So I'd still think it's good to have a decent hit sort of post-training, but more sort of equal decent hits over the day where we can.
Okay, cool. Thank you.